I think as healthcare workers, we're blessed to be in a situation where we're in a facility where we work, and if we're able to be a patient in that facility, unlike the general public, we know what's happening in that facility. We know the doctors, we know the OR staff, we know the anesthesiologists, we know everybody that's there. And for lack of a better term, you essentially are a VIP patient, which is what I think every patient should be, not just, those of us that are working in a facility, but I think that helps alleviate a lot of anxiety.
Beyond Clean offers a creative look into the inner workings of the healthcare industry committed to getting it right. Every instrument, every time. Join us every week as we explore the hidden world of one of the most important aspects of safe surgical care. And now your hosts, Hank Balch and Justin Poulin.
This week on Beyond Clean, we speak with Bob Mars, Director of Consulting Services and Field Operations with Aesculap. Bob has worked in the perioperative setting for 20 years in various roles ranging from Certified Surgical Technologist to SPD Technician, Case Cart Coordinator, Sterile Processing Supervisor, Manager, and Director. He has been a professional consultant for 5 years and is a trained surgical instrument expert. He is a certified instructor through ISHM, has been published in numerous healthcare publications, and was a contributor to the ISHM 7th edition manual and CHL Leadership Manual. Bob has a deep passion for excellence in sterile processing and believes that certification through education provides the foundation needed for superior patient care. Hank, really excited to talk to Bob. I know you know Bob, and this will be my first discussion with him, but just even in looking at his LinkedIn profile, you can just see how much experience he's had in this industry.
That's right, Justin. Bob's one of those guys who, even though he's been on the vendor side for a number of years now, he has always been a sterile processing leader at heart. And he's also one of the guys who has had opportunity to lead not only inside his department, but also outside at the chapter level. A well-known and well-publicized thought leader in the industry as well. So I'm really looking forward to getting his perspectives on the topics on this episode.
All right, well, let's just jump right into it. But before we do, a reminder, you can follow Beyond Clean on Twitter at Beyond Clean Info, the Facebook page, facebook.com/Beyond Clean Podcast, and on LinkedIn, linkedin.com/company/Beyond Clean. And we'll certainly take your emails. If you have questions for the show, we'll bring them up on a future episode. Just send an email to info@beyondclean.net. We'll be right back with Bob Mars, Director of Consulting Services and Field Operations with Aesculap. Joining us this week is Bob Mars, Director of Consulting Services and Field Operations with Aesculap. Bob, really appreciate you coming on to the show with Hank and I. Thank you for your time to talk with us about your experiences in the sterile processing world.
Well, Justin and Hank, thank you all very much for having me. It's an honor and a privilege.
I was perusing your LinkedIn profile as we were preparing for the interview, and one thing kind of stuck out, and it's an experience that you had that relates directly with how I wound up in healthcare and specifically going into nursing. But you had volunteered at Camp Barnabas, where perspectives are changed and disability is redefined. And I'm going to read just kind of a quote from it, but the campers are empowered by the love, acceptance, and encouragement that they receive during their week at camp, and that's through adaptive activities. All the campers are told yes, and they can be normal for a week. Can you talk about that? Because I just think that's such a unique and important experience. I'd love to share it with our listeners.
Yes, I'd be happy to. So it was a week in 2016 in the month of July. Actually, my wife, my son, and I all three participated in this camp, and the camp hosts about 300 campers with all spectrums of autism-type disabilities. There's even children with Down syndrome, and they're from the ages of first grade all the way up through high school, and some of the kids were even out of high school. But we spend a week there doing exactly what you said, allowing these kids to do things that they typically never get to do. One of the things that I learned from the experience as well was the break and the rest that the parents got from these children, and it was no small undertaking. It was gut-wrenching to me to see how, when the parents came, how exhausted they looked, just getting in line to register the children and have them go through the week of camp. But my duties there, I was actually a cabin dad. So they have high school and college-age students who man the cabins, and there's typically anywhere from 6 to 8 to even up to 10 of them who stay in the cabin with the campers. And the students actually stay with these campers 24 hours a day. And it was really amazing for me to watch the level of maturity and the love that these kids showed these campers and the way that they dealt with them throughout the week. And some were very, very severe disabilities. There was one of our girls with our group literally walked for the entire week from typically 6 in the morning until midnight every day. Her camper walked everywhere he went, and they literally walked with him the entire week. And it was amazing for me to see how these kids just loved him and made him feel normal for the week. And something that I would love to do again. I'm hoping to go back this year. I couldn't, but we're talking about doing it again. Our family's really big in mission work. We feel like it's a really important part of us as humans, and just trying to be better people.
I couldn't agree more. And originally I was going to be in engineering, and I had a good friend whose uncle had no arms and worked at a similar Easter SEALs camp where I grew up in Maine, and it was just a phenomenal experience. And I've always said there's no way I would have had the same level of attention to detail if that experience hadn't shaped me for 5 years of my, early youth. And it's like you just said, the way that we had we had counselors that came from Australia and England and Scotland, like all over the country. All over the world to come see the country. And it was a very eye-opening experience, especially, like I said, I grew up in Maine. It's, small town community. You don't really see the world, and this really opened my eyes to a lot of things. So I'm sure you had a great experience, and I hope you get to go again this coming summer.
Yeah, it's really something that I love doing. I've always had a passion for kids, and kids, even with disabilities, have been really a strong passion of mine. I actually, for 2 years, I couldn't work in a hospital, so I helped mentor a child who had cerebral palsy, and I was his aide in school for 2 years. So it's that, I think, got me started on my journey and wanting to work with kids and to just help them feel normal and just have better days.
Bob, keeping the human perspective on who we are as healthcare providers is so critical, and obviously for you and Justin both, these experiences were a formative part of that. But I've also heard you speak in person, particularly in regards to your sterile processing experience, and I think you referenced yourself as the $6 million man in terms of actually being a patient that has had to go under the knife and under the same types of instruments that you were responsible for processing as a CS professional. So I was wondering if you could talk a little bit about what you meant by $6 million man, and then transition us into a longer conversation here about the CS professional as a patient.
Sure. So I don't know if I should be laughing about it or crying, actually. But this May, in 2017, marked my 32nd surgery. I have had quite a few issues just all over my body, and A lot of it, I think, stems from my military experience and jumping out of planes and all that. But I, unfortunately, have had to be a patient 32 times. I think the one thing that I always think that's truly a blessing from it all is that it's helped me. It's helped me be more empathetic to patients, for sure. Having been one in so many different situations, and I've had everything from when I joke about the $6 million man, I've had everything from craniotomy down to ORIF of my index finger, and everything in between. But I have metal in my left knee, my left hip, my lower back, my neck, my both shoulders. So I've had a little bit of everything, and it's really been a humbling experience too. I'll say I think as healthcare workers, we're blessed to be in a situation where we're in a facility where we work, and if we're able to be a patient in that facility, unlike the general public, we know what's happening in that facility. We know the doctors, we know the OR staff, we know the anesthesiologists, we know everybody that's there. And for lack of a better term, you essentially are a VIP patient, which is what I think every patient should be, not just, those of us that are working in a facility, but I think that helps alleviate a lot of anxiety. And ironically, my 31st surgery, which happened late last year in November, was a total hip revision, was my first surgery that I had at a facility where I did not work and I did not know anybody, and I did it for my wife. She asked me, it was closer to our home, and just to ask if there was any way I could do that because it was kind of hard on her traveling back and forth, so I did. And she now jokes and says that she's never seen me ask for Versed so quickly prior to a surgical procedure. So, I went in there, and for the first time, I was thinking greatly about, who is working in sterile processing. When did my instruments get here? When did they get processed? Who processed them? When they processed them, were they thinking about that being their mother on the table, or their father, or their child, or whoever? Yeah. It's all those things that I think every patient every day thinks about. And how's my doctor going to respond? Who are the nurses? Who? Everybody. And again, I think I have to say that I came away very blessed in that out of all these surgeries, no surgical site infections, and this was another example. So I was well taken care of as the patient.
Well, you bring up a great point there is even the patients who are thinking about safety in their surgery, like obviously everyone wants their surgery to go well, but their minds tend to go to, I want a skilled surgeon, I want a great nursing team, I want to go to maybe a new hospital that has nice rooms, private rooms, that kind of stuff, but they're not often thinking about, I want to go to a facility where their sterile processing technicians are highly trained, where they're certified, where they have continuing education that is always driving them forward, where they have all the tools they need to do the job correctly. I know we have a young lady that works in our department who was a recipient of a kidney transplant, actually in our facility. And every single day she comes to work, again, with that knowledge of it's not just this could be somebody else's mom, parent, brother, whoever. It could also be me. And, not that it should be different, but it definitely does bring a different level of reality to you when you sit down and think, if I get in a car wreck on the way home, I want them to bring me back here because I trust this place, I trust these people, and really that's the model that you want to build in a department.
Absolutely. I kind of joke about it. I tell folks that I became a consultant because of all my surgeries. I could go down at any time, and I want every hospital to be, a first-class hospital and first-class sterile processing departments, and just preparing, I guess, selfishly for my possibility of going down for some reason or another.
That's a great point. I think we've mentioned it on a previous episode as well, that the vision for collaboration across this industry is one. Obviously, we all want, as sterile processing leaders, we want our departments to be great. But it's also important, like you said, we want everyone's department to be great. We don't want anybody out there to be taking shortcuts, to not know the right thing to do, to not have the right equipment or staffing or training support in order to do the right thing. Because you're right. We could be anywhere doing anything. Our family can be anywhere. And we want any hospital they walk into, that sterile processing team, to be an A-plus team. I think keeping that perspective that you've shared with that patient-centered, but also just human-centered perspective is huge. I wanted to talk a little bit here, though. To me, it's one thing for you, obviously, having been a patient, but how did you transfer that to your staff members? I know a lot of times there is a disconnect, so you can preach this and say, all right, guys, treat this like your family members on the table. But day in, day out, we're in this warehouse mode where it's just humming equipment. It's continual case carts coming through. We have to get through 4 trays an hour and get done. How did you share during your time as a CS leader for the people who may not have been patients themselves to keep that central?
I honestly think it's a company or a department culture that you develop and try to build. You focus on quality rather than quantity. I can't tell you how many times I said that term over and over and over again. And as much as I wanted my staff to hit a productivity number that we were always striving for, I would have much rather seen a lower productivity number with fewer number of sets going to the operating room with inoperable instruments or missing instruments or anything that might take the physician's mind away from the patient who's under the drapes. And I tried to always instill that into my staff to say, listen, when you're assembling trays, when you're working in this department, not only think about the patient, but think about that surgeon. And the more time that we can prevent he or she from being a quality manager and truly holding out their hand and getting an instrument that's working every time, that's the correct instrument, functioning properly, and cutting the way that they hope it'll cut or clamping the way that they hope it will clamp, that is time that they're focused on that patient and getting them better. It's those times when you go in the room where they're missing an instrument, or they just clamp down on a needle and half of the tungsten carbide insert fell out into the patient, or some other thing that happened where the surgeon then is frustrated and he's not focused on the patient, but rather an instrument that's not working. And so I always tried to talk about it from that perspective, and certainly shared hey, think about your family member being on the table or you being on the table. But at the end of the day, we want to just produce a quality product that's providing excellent service to our customers. And our customers mean the nursing staff, the physicians, the patient. And we just want to make sure that they have a safe stay in our building and that we get them in and out of surgery in a very positive way.
Bob, I definitely want to follow up on that, because you mentioned the whole, having an insert fall into a patient. And anytime I've done like an education for the OR, one of the things I always tell them is your count sheets, really only count the instrument. They don't count parts of instruments. And that's where you have to be as knowledgeable anyway as somebody in sterile processing, because you're the one that's doing that count. You need to know what parts of the instrument could be missing at the end of the case. And before you hand the instrument to the surgeon, you need to be able to inspect that so that you can account for it. And that, again, talks to that level of attention to detail, and I think it's an important one, an important point that isn't always made for surgical techs and scrub nurses alike.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I would agree. I think having been I think too, my experience as a surg tech certainly transferred over well and helped me to be able to explain. I think I was able to give my staff a deeper level of education and talk to them specifically about here's what this instrument does, this is what we clamp with it, and when it's not functioning properly, here's what could go wrong. And just spending more time talking and teaching that way as well. But you're right, it takes an incredible amount of attention to detail to make sure that we're providing a quality product to our customers.
Yeah, I think we'll bring that back up in a later segment, just talking about, the instruments themselves and again, manufacturing and holding up that standard. But one closing question for this segment would be really about whether you believe that we see a lot of data getting put out there now for people to assess quality and, infection rates and all these types of things. Do you think there should be some publicizing of central sterile quality metrics for the patients to be able to access as well?
I think it would be fantastic. I think the more transparent we become as a nation with our healthcare, the better our healthcare will become. I'm very proud of the facilities that I used to work for in Texas. They achieved the Baldrige Award for quality, and it's no small undertaking to put in the work that it takes to attain that achievement in quality, and they do it across all kinds of industries, restaurants, but in healthcare, I think I just don't think we can be transparent enough. I think the more we share, the more pressure it applies to ourselves to be better, and ultimately that's what we should be trying to be, is better.
Completely agree with that. We'll be right back with Bob Mars after a short break. We are back with Bob Mars, Director of Consulting Services and Field Operations with Aesculap. And Bob, now we want to talk about some leadership lessons maybe that you can share from the front lines and give us some examples of lessons, maybe hard lessons or easy lessons or, unique lessons that you've learned from your time as a leader in central sterile processing.
Lessons. I think I would rather call them hard knocks. Something that I've always, I'm very passionate about leadership. I think it started early on. I spent a majority of my career in the Army as a leader, and then getting out, I've always wanted to be a leader in some sort or fashion. And I think when I think about leadership, I would say one thing that I feel strongly about is that leaders are not born, that they are made. I think leadership can be fleeting. I tell people all the time that if you think you're a leader and you're taking a walk and you look behind you and no one's following, then you're just taking a walk. You're not really leading.
Yeah, that's right.
And leadership is a challenging thing. One day you can be a hero, and the next day you're not. And so you have to learn to deal with that. Leadership is very situational. I think every situation dictates a different type of leadership. And as you go through your career, I think these lessons are sometimes easy to learn and sometimes difficult to learn. I think it's really good for a person to have mentors that they can look up to. My personal belief is that as a leader, if you're not training those under you to take your position, I don't believe you're doing a good job as a leader. I think we should always be trying to develop our replacement. We should not be afraid to share everything that we know to make the people under us passionate. And if they desire to be a leader someday, we should be doing everything we can to help them become a leader.
That's a great point. We were actually talking to Stephen Kovac last week, and we spent a fair amount of time on the power of mentorship in the sterile processing department. But I like that idea of looking behind you and who's in your shadow. And if, as you said, there's no one following you, then you're just taking a walk. But if there's no one in your shadow, then are you really doing all that a leader's called to do, especially in this industry where it is so difficult? We spoke a couple of episodes ago to Patrick Dotz from Soliant Health, who does staffing across the country for sterile processing in OR leaders and nurses and techs. And the challenge in sterile processing in particular is when you need a leader, oftentimes you're having to reach outside of that facility if the last leader that was there was not doing, as you say, that development of those leaders behind them and the ones who are coming up the ranks. So it is critical, and I think that's one of the biggest opportunities for us out there today. In addition to the technical, scientific side of things that we have got to know, we've also got to put that emphasis on crafting and creating models of leadership development that we can pass on from generation to generation of leaders in these departments.
I agree. I think too many times we get wrapped up in being a leader and we forget about the human side of leadership too. One of my all-time favorite quotes, John Maxwell had it in a book that I was reading. It says he said that people don't care how much you know until they know how much you care. And I have found that probably to be more true than any other thing that I've ever learned in leadership. They don't care if we have a PhD, if we have the Amy document memorized verbatim from Section 1 through Section 10. They want to know that we care about them as human beings and that we're going to treat them like human beings when they're in our workplace. And I think too often leaders forget that, and we tend to be more dictatorial, I guess, for lack of a better term, where we want our staff to come in and, like you said, do those 4 trays an hour and make sure they're hitting the productivity number and getting everything knocked out, where, they could have come in from a horrible morning with children, or, they're struggling keeping the lights on, or whatever it might be. I think it's so important that we remember that stuff as we're leading them, and as much as we teach them the technical competence and the professional competence and everything that we do in our position, I think it's so very important that we focus on that human factor as well.
And Bob, one of the things that, going back to the knowing how much you care quote, I've heard you tell a story, and I don't want to put you on the spot here, but I've heard you tell a great story about leadership by example, and in particular, that model of the leader as the advocate for your people and the advocate for the quality and the safety that your people are responsible for. And I don't want to give the story away, but it has to do with you and a doorway and an angry, frustrated surgeon wanting an instrument tray. Would you mind going into that story just a little bit? Because I think it does highlight the kind of stuff that we're talking about here.
Sure. I think sometimes, I think I would call that the ugly side of leadership. Sometimes we do things and we're like, oh man, I shouldn't have done that. I'm going to lose my job. But we had a situation just where we needed to stop a process that had been happening for a very long time in a facility, and this facility chose me to be that person to talk to the surgeon and say, hey, sorry, you can't do that anymore. And that person was not happy at all. So much so I joke and say that I heard words that I hadn't heard since basic training. I guess long story short, this person said, not only have I done this for a long time, I'm going to continue doing it. I'm going to go back to your department and I will force someone to do this. And, without thinking, I just said, hey, that's going to be a little bit difficult because there will be about 250 pounds in the doorway that you're not going to be able to move. as soon as I said it, I thought, oh my word, I should have never said that. And so it was challenging, to say the least. But at the end of the day, I think as leaders, we're called to be that buffer
Exactly.
for our staff, no matter what it is. If it's an angry surgeon, or if it's angry OR staff, or somebody from the floor, or whoever it might be. I tell people all the time, if something is going wrong in my department, you need to come scream at me, because it's my fault. I'm the leader. I accept responsibility for this department. If my staff have not done something appropriately, they have done that because I haven't given them whatever it is that they need to do that job correctly, whether it's education and training, the right amount of instruments and equipment, the right amount of staff, whatever it might be. I think we need to say as leaders, this is my department, and I accept the good and the bad that goes along with it. And no matter what, I'm going to protect my people. And, I always reference a movie, We Were Soldiers. It's the story of Colonel Hal Moore. And Sam Elliott and Mel Gibson are in the movie, and Mel Gibson gives a speech in the middle of the movie when they're going to war and says, men, we're all going to go there. And I can't promise you that we're all going to come home, but one thing I can promise you is that I'll be the first to put my foot on the battlefield, and I'll be the last to take my feet off of the battlefield. And so you can trust that, and no matter what, I'm going to bring all of you home. And I kind of liken that to what we do in sterile processing and the war that we're waging on these awful microbes. That as the leader of the sterile processing department, we're telling our staff, I'm going to be there at the beginning, I'm going to be there at the end, I'm going to be there for you, I'm going to fight for you, I'm going to get you what you need, I'm going to do whatever it is we have to do to make sure that every patient that comes into our facility is treated the same and leaves here safely, and that we don't do anything that puts their procedures in jeopardy.
That's a great story on leadership in both cases. I know how We Were Soldiers ends. I don't know how your story ended with the surgeon, but my mind is running wild on whether or not they challenged your 250 pounds.
So this gentleman actually, after cooler heads prevailed, my administrators, it was very interesting. They, as all of this was happening, I was, of course, running out and screaming, help! And our OR called our administrators. And my last trip through the doors, every one of our O's were standing in the hallway and said, we've got your back. We're going to do the right thing. This is why we brought you here. Hang in there. And it was, I literally, I started crying in the hallway. It was one of the most amazing experiences that I've ever had. But the next day I was able to go to this person's office and take the standard that talks about single-use instrumentation. And he said, why has nobody ever talked to me about this? He wasn't maliciously doing something. He was doing something that he thought was right for a long, long time, and nobody had ever really told him. And we wound up becoming very good friends, and he actually performed surgery on me. So it had a very good ending, in my opinion. And I didn't get fired, so that was really good.
You didn't get fired. You had enormous support, and you also showed this is actually probably the greatest example of leadership. You showed the ability to rebound from a very difficult or contentious scenario and make it a win-win and move on. And that, to me, is forgiveness is another really key element, I think, of great leaders. A great characteristic, I should have said.
Absolutely.
So,
thank you.
Yeah, no, I'm impressed. And let's talk about certification, because you kind of threw that in there along that story. And, really, it's an important part, I think, of career growth. I know you have a number of certifications that are issued by ISHM, and I do know that you contributed to the 7th edition manual and the CHL Leadership Manual. So you obviously place an emphasis on certification. And to go back to the first segment, when I was talking about surgical techs and nurses, needing that information as well. This is another great point. I got my bachelor's degree in nursing, but I definitely was never trained on surgical instrument inspection until I actually moved out of nursing, took on a role in the vendor community and began to learn about instrument repair and instrument inspection and all of these other aspects. That's when I got that training. I did get my CCSVP, and I do believe very strongly in certification as well. But there is no training for this aspect other than, the programs that are provided under certification. And that to me is the biggest selling point on certification and continuing education once it's obtained. Maybe you want to echo some of those thoughts or add to the discussion that's really been ongoing on Beyond Clean about the importance of certification.
Sure. It's something that I've always been passionate about. I don't think I know certification shows a level of commitment, a level of competence for people who are doing it. And like you said, we go. It's not just that we learn, but we show our aptitude by passing an exam. And then we maintain our aptitude by ongoing education and training, which is vitally, vitally important. I don't think there's enough of it. And I agree with you. I think not only in our departments is it vitally important, but I think our vendors should have it as well. It's one of the things that I've worked really hard with at my current company, and now they're making it mandatory for our sales representatives to be certified. And I think it's so important that not only we know, but it's really, for me, it's hard to gain trust in a vendor who comes in and can't speak my language, for lack of a better term. You want them to be able to come in and know what the term impingement means, or cavitation, or whatever the term is, that they can actually speak to you and you can say, oh my Lord, they do know sterile processing. And they've taken it to another level, and they've become certified as well. I loved a couple of years ago when I read Hank's article on the Triple Crown certification. I'd never heard it called that. And when I saw it, I was like, finally, man, I love that. It's just a big deal. And it's something I'm really proud to say to my team. I think I have one more person that has one more exam, and then my entire consulting team will hold the Triple Crown as well. And I think it's important. I think now that I'm a vendor, for lack of a better term, again, there's no better way to gain credibility going into a facility than to say, I've walked in your shoes, number one, but I still work hard to maintain my certification. So when I come here and preach to you about certification, I'm leading by example, and I have the certifications that I'm preaching to you about. I just think it's vitally important, and to the success of our departments, to the growth of our staff, and the marketability. When I got out of the Army and became a surgical tech, when I attained my certification, I immediately became more marketable. Hospitals wanted to hire me and wanted me to come work for them because I was a certified surgical technologist and not just a school graduate and then kind of dropped off. And so that kind of got me started, and I realized that it could help me be better at what I do. And even make myself be able to grow in the industry.
Yeah, and I'll close on this thought too. I think it is vitally important that the vendors get the certification, and partly too because maybe they will participate in the local ISHM chapters, because that's another great way to get your CEUs, and just having that involvement. And I think it's important for vendors to hear the big picture of some of the struggles of sterile processing that maybe go beyond their product. You talk about just having the basic knowledge, but I think of things like dropping off loaners without instructions for use, and some of these what should be deal breakers for a department to take on new instrumentation. There are vendors that maybe are not as familiar with the IFU or giving that in-servicing to the staff, and there are others that do a fantastic job. But I think if you know that somebody's coming in and they have, from a vendor standpoint, a CCSVP, and then they're going to do an in-service on their product, they might be able to speak to more than just the fine bullet points. Like, I think of a PowerPoint presentation where somebody is just reading each bullet point to you instead of taking that information and putting it into context. That's what makes it relatable.
Absolutely.
That's what makes it memorable. That's what makes it usable. And that's a huge advantage to know more than what you need to know.
I agree 100%.
All right, that's going to close segment 2. We'll be right back again with Bob Mars after another short break. All right, we are back with Bob Mars, Director of Consulting Services and Field Operations with Aesculap. And Bob, this segment we want to focus on surgical instrument quality and Pakistan instruments. And let's just go right into that. I know we sort of talked about it a little bit before we began to do the interview today, but Pakistan instruments, a lot of debate. We see them in surgical instrument sets. What's the big deal with using Pakistan instruments? A lot of places know that the Forster sponge forceps and the towel clamps get thrown away, and so they go with Pakistan to reduce the cost. What's your opinion on that, and really what's the harm?
So I look at it a couple of ways. I think the first would be fiscally, as a department manager and a person doing a budget and purchasing instruments. When I talk about surgical instrument sets and quality surgical instruments, and that's really what we're talking about here, is we're talking about a different level of quality in the manufacturing process. And if I have I don't know if you're paying $14 for a towel clamp, and you opt to go with a different towel clamp that is $1.40, and you replace 10 of them in the time that you might replace one of a better one, of course the math there is not adding up. But I would much rather go down the road of coaching and teaching my staff to make sure that they put all of the instruments back in the tray before that tray leaves the operating room, and that they have all the instruments back. So I think that the instruments that are going into a surgical tray need to be of a higher quality than a typical, something that might be used on the floor or something like that. So I believe that when you do that, that you provide a better quality product to the patient. And when I think about that, I think about my very first trip. I was able to visit my company in Germany and see the manufacturing process and look at the hands-on and the pride that was taken as they were making surgical instruments, and to talk to these men and women who had been making surgical instruments for 35 years, that went through a 3.5-year apprenticeship, that were trained by professional expert instrument manufacturers, and the way that they were made and the quality standards that were followed. And often you'll hear of European instruments following the DIN standard, or ISO standards. It's very important to know that a company is focused on that quality standard, that the same process is used over and over and over again when an instrument is made, the same love that goes into it. And my very first trip to Germany to see one of these people making an instrument, he likened it to, he said, this instrument is truly an extension of the physician. This is a product that they are using, and he likened them to an artist. He said, this is like Da Vinci's paintbrush creating a masterpiece, except they're working on the masterpiece that is the human body, and they want to create a Whistler's mother every time. They want this to be a perfect work of art every single time they're using it. And I think that's probably the biggest difference, is that the quality standards that are in place throughout the European community and where instruments are made as opposed to Pakistan. I know there's been a lot of debate about it. A while back there was a BBC video that came out. I think when you talk Pakistan Instruments, I think it's difficult to confirm what kind of quality processes are in place. I don't know that we know that age relationships as far as the manufacturing process is being appropriately applied there. There's a lot of things in the making of those instruments that are just not where they need to be yet. And I'm not saying that they will never get there. Maybe they will. But I do know that in the small town of Tuttlingen in southern Germany that they have got upwards of 500 companies that have been there for Aesculap being the longest at 150 years manufacturing surgical instruments. So this is a process that they have learned through years and years and years and years of experience and training and education and manufacturing and quality standards and ISO standards and everything that we talk about when we talk about having a repeatable quality product. And I just don't think that they're able to be to that point yet in Pakistan. And hopefully if they're going to continue manufacturing instruments, which I'm sure they will be able to go down that road and to be able to step up and to be able to manufacture instruments in that way.
Well, a wise man once told me, never ask a question you don't know the answer to. And I think that's the way we teed up this segment. But I'll ask you another one. Oftentimes, Pakistan instruments are referred to as floor-grade instruments. And so what are the dangers or what are some of the problems that can arise in mixing floor-grade Pakistan instruments, especially like the aforementioned patterns that we discussed, in with your surgical sets? What kind of challenges will that present to the sterile processing team as they try to manage quality output?
Absolutely. Number one, the standard is very different. When you think about the width of the instrument, maybe the length of the instrument, you're gonna see where maybe you have 6 mosquito hemostats, and the difference from tip to tip to tip could be anywhere from 2 to 5 millimeters. And that may not seem like a lot to us, but when you put that in the hand of a surgeon who is wearing loops or working on a fine vessel where they're used to reaching a certain distance, it could impact them greatly. But in sterile processing, even more, a term that I love that I've learned since I've been working for my company, my German colleagues taught us a term called corrosion flu. And I've seen that more and been able to apply that more since I've been a consultant than I think almost any other thing that I've done. As we look at sets and we look at corrosion inside of a set, as we talked about, you can go down 2 different paths. You can go down poor quality instruments, or you can go down water and steam quality. And both may be as high as each other in a facility, or it may just be that there's a lesser quality instrument that's corroding more quickly. And when they do, this corrosion will spread from instrument to instrument. It can spread to your mechanical equipment, your washer disinfector, your sterilizers. And so it's really important that when we talk about not only being quality managers, but in running the department, being physical managers, and make sure we're taking care of the products that we've been empowered to take care of. Like any other metal, different types of metals can react under different circumstances, and these things just typically corrode more quickly. So when they do that, then you're endangering, your entire fleet of instruments, which I think that's also something that's often often overlooked. When we hear the term asset, we typically don't apply that to a hemostat or a Babcock or a Coker. We think rather of a CR machine or an anesthesia machine or a new fracture table or something like that. And most facilities, even a medium-sized facility, doesn't realize that they could have $2 to $3 million worth of these instruments or assets in their facility. And it's up to us to make sure that we're taking care of those things and making sure that they last as long as possible.
That's a great point, Bob, and something that we've talked about previously, I believe it was on the episode with Brian Reed with the Synco Health, just talking about all these facilities across the country and the globe who are still doing manual tracking and monitoring of that surgical inventory and those assets, like you said. It's nearly impossible without some kind of software there to keep track of what's here and how much is it here, but where is it going, when does it come back, when is it going out for repair. On the workflow, even for this Pakistan question, I'm sitting here thinking as you're speaking, I know one of the major problems that it causes us on the value of our assets is if I send a $14 towel clip or sponge stick up to the operating room and I get a Pakistan in return in my tray, that was not a good exchange in terms of values of assets. And, to that point, I was wondering if you could talk briefly about on the front line, how would a technician, as they're processing a tray, besides just finding the country of origin that's stamped on there, which you can talk about that as well, but how would a frontline technician know or be tipped off maybe that they're dealing with something besides German-made stainless steel?
Honestly, there's a number of ways. They often look different. They feel different. They're lighter. It's really interesting. I've seen any number of ways that you can tell. Of course, the first that you said is that stamp that's on the instrument that says, here's where I was made. And ultimately, we always recommend, I hear a lot about taping and dipping and various things, and it's one thing that I've always recommended against. I've been in a lot of facilities, and I've looked at, I can't even tell you how many instruments, and to date, I have yet to see a hospital that appropriately maintains both taping and dipping. I always find instruments that tape is peeling, or there's someone decided that 1.5 or 1.25 times around an instrument is not enough, so they wrapped it around 8 times. And so now you've got layer upon layer that's chipping and peeling and cracking, and likewise with the dipping, it too will crack and come off of the instrument. And rather, I tell people to make sure that they've got properly made instruments with proper CE marking on them, so you have the item number that's on the instrument and identify it that way. Anytime we open a tray that had been taped red for cardiovascular, I always find red tape and green tape and brown tape and black tape, and then people are guessing what instrument am I putting in the tray rather than looking at a number and verifying that number matches the number that's on the count sheet. We're relying on, I tell people this all the time in my career. I've been working with instruments for 27 years now. And I'm still amazed at how many instruments that I come across that I don't know the name of. And we're asking people who have walked into our department or, we hired, they've been there a couple of years. We're asking them to know every specialty and every set and how the instrument works. And without proper marking, then we're asking them to, by memory, build a set because they look at it and say it looks like a cryo, but I'm not totally sure, and how do I tell the difference, and all that stuff. So it's a big challenge, but it's something that we definitely need to push and work on.
If you took all of the manufacturer catalogs and stacked them on top of each other and then took a look to say all of these variations, all these instrument names and titles, and you're right, to expect a single technician to have, especially at these larger facilities, have that scope of knowledge. They can tell by looking without cross-checking those product numbers. Yeah, that's asking the impossible. I was going to bring up on our first episode, actually, we talked to Michael Matthews, and he's been posting on LinkedIn some great pictures through inspection microscopes, up close instrumentation and issues. And I'm just thinking on this Pakistan question too, I would love to see some side by sides for the the serrations on some of these Pakistan pickups or needle holders, inserts, etc. I think that, in addition to everything that you mentioned too, would start to highlight some of the true differences maybe that you can't see with the naked eye.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I love that. I've actually been following those posts as well, and what an amazing tool. I think the thing that I like more than anything is that he's calling out his staff. He's telling them, in my opinion, what a fantastic leader. He's giving his staff the tools to do their job better than most. And when they find something, he's giving them the credit that they deserve for finding those issues. And I just say kudos to Michael and his staff. It's really amazing.
Yeah, I totally agree with you. You know, something that you mentioned a little earlier, you talked about your first visit to Germany and how the quality and the passion struck you as so different maybe than what you were expecting. And, you know, speaking as a proud American, you know, we're taught from our youngest days that you should buy something that says made in the USA, and then you get hired into a hospital and you're taught you need to buy something that says made in Germany. Could you talk a little different? Just, I get that there's this, the serene village, that multiple generations of instrument manufacturers have been going, and growing and working and passing down this knowledge, in families and in their homes. But is that something that is being pushed out to the broader globe? Are we going to see at some point that level of manufacturing expertise come to the United States or maybe to other countries around the world? What's happening?
Yeah, it's, you know, for sure. I do know that, you know, our company, for example, we manufacture instruments in Poland. We have a plant in Malaysia. And the thing that always impressed me as I looked at the company is that no matter which plant you walk into, the exact same quality standards are in place. And I think that's so very important. I'm hearing now that there are more manufacturers of instruments popping up in China. You know, of course, Pakistan is out there. And I think as they grow, they're going to be forced into higher quality manufacturing processes. And that's what I love. It's you know, our company, we test the steel that we use on the instruments to make them. And if the steel doesn't meet a certain quality, then it doesn't get used to make our instruments. And the quality standards are the same for pattern consistency and length and width of an instrument and the various things like that. And I do see it getting better. And I think more companies are going to start spreading that exact same process from one place to another and being able to do it. I'm not sure that it'll ever come here. I would love to see it. You know, our company's hometown is near Bethlehem, Pennsylvania, and it's so sad for me to go up there and see steel mills that are no longer running. And they're just shells of what they once were, and it would be amazing, in my opinion, you know, to have jobs come back to the U.S. and have people have that skilled trade that's happening, you know, thing that we're missing, or we don't see quite as much of anymore.
Yeah, you're actually talking where I live right now. I know I mentioned I grew up in Maine, but I live in Pennsylvania. I'm only about an hour and 40 minutes from those offices in Bethlehem, and you're 100% right. This was a manufacturing state. You know, especially in this part of, you know, that area closer to New York City, there's so much industry that got shut down. It would be great if there was a way to bring that back, Bob, no doubt.
Mm-hmm.
I'll tell you, we've really enjoyed having you on as a guest, and your insight has been fantastic. And I want to just thank you for taking the time to, you know, once again, I know I thanked you at the start, but I'd like to thank you again here as we close, and just tell you that we've really appreciated your candidness and your stories and your examples of leadership during the interview today.
Well, thank you so very much for having me on. It's truly, like I said, it's an honor and a privilege for me to be able to do this. And I can't tell you how much I appreciate y'all doing this. Our industry needed something like this so desperately. And thank you all for taking the lead on that and getting the word out, not only here in the U.S., but around the world. It truly was amazing.
That was Bob Mars, Director of Consulting Services and Field Operations with Aesculap. Hank, I know there's always this theme of leadership and certification. It won't be the last episode where we, touch upon those topics. But amongst that, I think the thing that really impressed upon me is we do often talk about the patient and think about what it's like to be the patient. Imagine the patient was your loved one, and every single one of those trays is going to be used on a family member or a friend. And in this case, 32 procedures is no joke. And here's somebody that has a really interesting history with not only delivering, but being on the receiving end of surgical services to a great extent. And I just thought that perspective was incredible. And as you said, we don't necessarily want to encourage us all to be self-centered in that perspective, but yeah, it does change a little bit of the narrative that goes on internally. What if that set was being used on me?
That's right. And I don't think we can hear too much about the importance of leadership and mentorship. And as he brought up, the need to look behind you and know there will be a day that I will retire, or there will be a day where I will have to move across country and someone else will have to run this department. Who is that going to be, and will they be ready? Will they have the passion, the framework, and the leadership development to step in and continue this excellent care of our patients? And I think that was a great setup that Bob gave us and some great tips that folks on the front lines can start doing today.
Yeah, I think it just can't be reiterated enough not to withhold information, right? Sometimes people think that, this is what's going to make me indispensable. This is what's going to make me valuable. This is what's going to secure my job. And it is a great leap of maturity and leadership to say that information should be made available to everybody, because truly only the leaders are going to make great use of that information. And being a leader doesn't mean being a manager or having a supervisory role. There are plenty of leaders that are very content being technicians in a department because that's what they have the time for, and that's what they have the energy for, but they are still leaders in the department from the aspect of sharing that information with others and helping ensure that the communication about the challenges that the department is facing every day are openly talked about with open solutions being presented to each other. And that dialogue is what makes a successful department, and beyond the department, a successful institution.
That's exactly right. And beyond the institution, a successful industry. And I'm so glad that we have the opportunity with Bob to talk about instrument quality again, in particular those Pakistan instruments. We still see them, even though it's been years now since there was recommendations out there to watch those qualities in our surgical trays, and you still see them in facilities getting into the normal workflow, getting into surgery. I was glad that we had the opportunity to drill down a little deeper, give some tips and insight in there for our frontline technicians who are listening to know how to identify those and ultimately why they need to be taken out if these things are going into surgery.
Yeah, I liked that. I'm paraphrasing here, but that corrosion soup. You never know. Is it that instrument that's rusting that you're seeing the staining on, or was it another instrument? And then even on top of that, it might not be either instrument. It could be the pipes. It could be a water quality issue. And so introducing those Pakistan instruments and reusing them, especially if they are floor grade like towel clips or sponge forceps, you do run the risk of introducing a very difficult element or difficult to diagnose element of staining to those instrument sets. And I'll take it a step further and just expand on that as we kind of close out the show. But how does somebody know if that's bioburden? How does somebody, rust is one thing, but it could be that the instrument wasn't properly cleaned, and that level of staining makes it very difficult to inspect an instrument.
That's absolutely right. And to close out on that, the idea that Bob brought up, and again, this has been a theme that we've seen a couple of times, but publicizing those quality metrics to patients out there who are trying to decide the safest, the best hospital to go to, not just the best doctors, not just the best nurses, but the best sterile processing teams out there. I think that's something that we need to keep pushing and keep discussing.
Well, it was definitely a pleasure talking to Bob, and even with all the challenges he's had and all the commitment he's had professionally, he did also say he believes very much in mission work and doing things to help others. So you definitely can speak to the quality of his character just in talking with him. Very much enjoyed that. That is going to do it for this week's show. As a reminder, you can help support us by subscribing to Beyond Clean on iTunes and Stitcher. We would certainly appreciate a rating and a review, because your feedback is very important to the show. And on behalf of Hank and myself, thank you for listening to another edition of Beyond Clean.